This is On Assignment. Hello and welcome to On Assignment. I'm Imran Siddiqui. Alex Villarreal is off this week. Coming up, what does the near future hold for Afghanistan as U.S. troops prepare to leave the country? We'll talk with our Pentagon correspondent. What goes on behind closed doors at Google, the world's largest internet company? Our reporter takes us inside Google's California campus. Senator John Kerry takes over for U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. We'll get the story from the State Department. And Kenya elects a new president, but just barely. We'll tell you more as we take you on assignment. In February, President Obama announced that the United States and NATO would begin an early drawdown of troops in Afghanistan. More than half of the 66,000 troops there will be going home in 2013. Luis Ramirez is VOA's Pentagon correspondent and has been in Afghanistan recently with the U.S. military. Alex Villarreal talked with him about the situation in Afghanistan now and how events have led to this point. Let's take a look.
So originally, when the U.S. led this invasion of Afghanistan, the original goals that were set out, how does the current situation stand up against those?
The initial goal was to go in and take out Al-Qaeda, and then to remove the Taliban from power. Those two goals were achieved, followed by the effort to secure the country, to make it stable, to allow conditions for a democratic government, which has happened.
So the current plan is to have all foreign combat troops withdraw from the country by the end of next year. How ready is the Afghan army to take control of all security?
Well, if you ask the U.S. commanders, they believe they're well on their way. They are aware that some challenges remain. We've had a number of insider attacks that have gotten lots of publicity. But there are also, the stories of a good percentage of the country already in the hands of the Afghan National Security Forces.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, who was in Afghanistan, says U.S. forces will be there as a backup.
What you'll see this summer is that the Afghans will be tested, the Afghan security forces will be tested. We'll be there with them, and that's as much a physical support as it is kind of psychological support.
The troop reduction will be gradual, allowing a sufficient number of U.S. soldiers to be on hand to provide that support.
Now, what about this notion expressed in your piece that the Taliban is just waiting in the wings, waiting for foreign troops to withdraw, and will then re-enter into these territories that it once held control of and try to retake them again? How has the Pentagon responded to those concerns?
They're absolutely aware of the threat that exists.
That future depends on a number of unresolved questions. The 2013 fighting season is approaching, and it will be a test for the newly trained Afghan forces who will be at the forefront for the first time. Also in question is the number of U.S. troops that would remain to advise and assist Afghanistan beyond 2014, and the outcome of elections also next year to determine who will replace longtime Afghan president and U.S. ally Hamid Karzai.
And what about the role of Pakistan in all of this? Because you talk about the concerns that Afghanistan become a safe haven for al-Qaeda, but there are now complaints that Pakistan is doing the same thing.
Well, certainly there have been very loud, clear complaints on the part of the United States about Pakistan's harboring of groups such as the Haqqani network. But at the same time, U.S. commanders in Afghanistan are in constant communication now with their Pakistani counterparts, and there is great hope that relations will not only stay good but improve and allow for Pakistan to assume a greater role in the stabilization of Afghanistan.
So, Luis, you were recently in Afghanistan traveling with the Defense Secretary. Now, being there on the ground and at these bases, you're able to talk to some members of the military who have been there for a while. What do they tell you? What's the mood like right there now on the ground?
Well, certainly, yeah, it depends on the mood of the person. It depends on the person who you're talking to. You get everything from the, young soldier who is ready to come home. But you also get a sense that people don't want to leave before the job is done.
Now, when you talk about this conflict and successes, how exactly does the Pentagon define its successes?
Well, the Pentagon is very consistent in saying that progress is being made. The outgoing commander of ISAF, General John Allen, said, victory is coming.
Frankly, looking back on that day in July 2011, 19 months ago, I did not have the sense of optimism that I have now that I stand here, as I stand here before you today. The optimism and the very real sense of knowing that we will be victorious.
The way he put it, though, is he said it's not a victory that will come with parades and with a declared moment. It will come gradually. It will come as you see stability returning and being maintained in the country.
Our VOA Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez talking with my co-host Alex Villarreal. We're taking a break now, but when we come back, we'll take you inside the innovative headquarters of Google in California. You're watching On Assignment. Google is the world's largest internet search engine. Most anyone who has used the internet has visited the Google homepage. It never changes, but sometimes the logo does, artistically rendered to mark big occasions or events. It's the Google Doodle, a reminder of the people behind the brand. Joining me right now is VOA's Brian Patton, who went to San Francisco to the headquarters of Google. How was it?
It was an interesting, innovative, fun experience.
And if you have a baby, they will take care of a baby, they'll give you the food and the 20% thing. We want to talk about that.
Right. The company's philosophy is to hire very bright people and to try to clear away any clutter that would keep them from focusing on the task at hand that they need to do. So there's free lunches, 4 or 5 different types of food. There is child care. You can bring your pet to work there. It's a very open, free, and you can even play volleyball or play ping pong. So there's kind of an open, free environment to try to make people feel like it's home.
Okay, so let's take a look at the story and then we come back.
Anyone who uses Google will occasionally notice a doodle, a specially designed logo to commemorate holidays like Chinese New Year, or obscure anniversaries like the date the London subway system opened 150 years ago, or a quirky tribute like this Zamboni animation depicting the machine used to resurface ice skating rinks. These artistic renderings of the Google logo may bring more users to its homepage, but Ryan Germick, the chief doodler, says their value to the company isn't found in a traditional business plan.
The existential question of why.
Why are you here?
We're here to surprise and delight our users and humanize Google.
Unlike the business side of Google that constantly analyzes data and usage, the doodles, he says, are evaluated on subjective criteria.
We look at social networks, we look at press, we look at, do we make each other laugh or smile with the thing that we're doing? And try to have more of an emotional connection rather than like, this is converting more clicks than the last one.
Doodler Jennifer Hom says the team creates over 300 doodles each year in many different languages, but stays away from topics that are political or controversial.
We basically think of anything that's innovative, artistic, and nerdy, something that's appropriate for Google.
She says doodle ideas can come from just about anywhere. Many, like the suggestion for an interactive rendering of a buckyball, a form of carbon composed of 60 atoms that looks like a molecule, come from inside the company.
I'd never heard of what this was, but there were like 10 to 12 people in Google who were obsessed with buckyballs.
Google's culture of innovation, the relaxed environment, the mix of work and play helps the creative process. Doodle engineer Chris Hom, no relation to Jennifer, animates artist drawings. He says he first got involved with the team as part of a program to nurture innovation and growth.
My involvement started out as a 20% project, which was kind of a phenomenon at Google where engineers get to spend 1 day a week or 20% of their time working on whatever they want. And so I was building some little animations, and someone on the digital team saw them and said, "Hey, why don't you come do that on the homepage?" And it's been having a blast here ever since.
These Google Doodlers say the irreverent humor of the artwork reflects that culture of innovation and the idea that Google should be a fun place to work or visit online. Brian Patton, VOA News, San Francisco.
We're back with Brian Patton. Brian, what is the one thing that struck you the most when you went to Google headquarters?
What impressed me was that freedom, that sense of freedom while you were there, that people were all buying into this kind of philosophy of just putting their all in there. And while there must be stress and people must be fired, you didn't feel like it was a high-stress environment.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're taking a break now. On the other side, we'll find out about the big job that's facing the new U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry. You're watching On Assignment. Former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is a widely admired figure, and her replacement, former Massachusetts Senator John Kerry, has joked that he has big heels to fill. Our State Department correspondent Scott Stearns talked about Hillary Clinton's foreign policy legacy and more with On Assignment's Doug Bernard. Let's check it out.
Scott Stearns, what are we going to remember about Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and her State Department?
She says that when President Obama asked her to serve as Secretary of State, she felt that her biggest challenge was trying to restore America's image in the world, coming out of the administration of George W. Bush to somewhat unpopular wars overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so she embraced this long-traveled tenure as Secretary of State in a way of trying to repair some relations overseas.
Traditionally, how much leeway does a Secretary of State have?
That depends entirely on the president and the relationship between them. You saw even in the George W. Bush administration a difference between President Bush's relationship with Colin Powell and his relationship with Condi Rice, who had been his national security advisor in the first term. So when she moved over to state, for the second term, I think she felt she had more leeway. She knew the president better than Colin Powell, I think.
So let's look forward a little bit. Secretary Kerry has just finished his first official trip abroad. It was packed with a lot of issues, a lot of travel. How did it go?
I think it accomplished what he was looking to do, which was to introduce himself formally to both world leaders and his counterparts as foreign minister.
What sort of differences, if any, are you seeing, and I know it's early, in terms of covering the Clinton State Department and now the Kerry State Department?
On policy, I would say there are a few differences, largely because, as you say, it's early, one. Two, Barack Obama is still the president of the United States. So while you say that a Secretary of State is America's top diplomat, the president is really the guy who's calling the shots. Stylistically, I would say you can already see a big difference.
Such as?
Hillary Clinton is a brand. Team Clinton comes in intact from her presidential campaign or from her Senate race. She has people who arrange the Vanity Fair interviews, people who are molding her brand.
You traveled with Secretary Clinton on a number of her trips abroad, and we all saw the images on the TV cameras, the events and that sort of thing. I'm wondering what kinds of memories or stories you can share with us about covering Secretary Clinton when the cameras weren't rolling.
Consummate politician, and I mean that in a good way, because politician is often a bad word. I'm thinking of a time in Zambia when she was probably well over an hour behind schedule, moving from one part of a conference center at some AGOA forum to another sort of meeting some other people. There was a small group of women who had some sort of USAID project. I think perhaps they were weaving baskets or something. They had set up their crafts on a walkway. The schedule was that Secretary Clinton was going to stop and just chat with them. couldn't be done. She was behind schedule. That was scratched from the schedule. But she noticed them walking along the walk, and she stopped. Not just to say hi, she looked at their goods, she came around behind them, she said, okay, who's got a camera? She made sure everybody had a photograph. Hillary Clinton, I think, and it's said of her husband, was someone who, when she's giving you her time, is really giving you her time. She has eye contact, you're feeling you're making a connection, as opposed to some people in this town who they'll be talking to you, but they're also like checking out what else is going on and thinking about what they're next. Right. I think her ability to take a moment, to be in that moment, and to give 100% of her attention in that moment to the person who she's speaking to, you know, I think that's effective diplomatically. It certainly was effective with these women in Zambia.
That was VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns speaking with On Assignment's Doug Bernard. Many thanks to them. Now, moving on to Kenya, where Uhuru Kenyatta became the country's 4th president when he secured just over 50% of the vote, eliminating the need for a runoff against his main rival, Raila Odinga. On Assignment's Rebecca Ward caught up with Nairobi correspondent Gabe Joslow for some background on this. Let's take a look.
You know, it was interesting talking to people, especially in the lead up to the elections. I traveled up to the town of Eldoret, which was at the center of some of the violence last time. And I met up with a group of internally displaced people who are still displaced from 5 years later after the violence. And what was surprising to me, but not so surprising when you really think about it, they were voting for Kenyatta exclusively. These were members of his same ethnic group, and so they very much supported him for that reason. But it surprised me that they would be so devoted to somebody who was charged with creating the violence that displaced them 5 years ago. But the thing is, the ICC charges actually, somewhat ironically, helped to unite a lot of his supporters around him, because a lot of the people who supported Uhuru Kenyatta saw these charges as interference from the West. So this was a line that he used a lot in his campaigning. The other thing is that his running mate, William Ruto, who will be the future deputy president as well, was also charged by the ICC. He's actually in a different case, and he's from the rival ethnic community that Mr. Kenyatta had been clashing with, or Mr. Kenyatta's supporters. So a lot of people would tell me that they were supporting this coalition between Kenyatta and Ruto.
The ethnic Kikuyu residents at the Naka displaced peoples camp in the Rift Valley were driven from their homes by Kalenjin mobs following the last presidential election in Kenya. Years later, they're still waiting to be resettled by the Kenyan government. Camp resident Scholastica Wanjiru says she sees hope in the alliance of Kikuyu presidential candidate Uhuru Kenyatta and his Kalenjin running mate William Ruto.
It will help us very much because, as you can see, now they are telling us we are brothers and sisters. We have seen the fruits of their union and we are all together now.
What was his persona like when you saw him at press conferences or during the rallies leading up to the elections? Do you perceive him to be, you know, a uniter of parties or of people?
You know, I've never had a chance to interview him personally, but from what I've seen, you know, he's a very charismatic guy. He's the son of Kenya's first president, and he carries with him a lot of that legacy. And he was really born into a life of politics, and you see that he adapts to that lifestyle with a lot of ease. It just seems to come very naturally to him. At the same time, he's not the most active or engaged lawmaker. He hasn't been in the past anyway. He's more of known as a businessman, of a socialite. And so you do see a lot of the charisma coming out. His first speech, though, when he was elected, was really impressive. A lot of observers thought that he did a really remarkable job, saying that he would promise to be a uniter, to work for all of Kenya, to work with members of all political parties, and it was a very strong and impassioned speech.
Now, you mentioned this already, the election violence of 2007, and that is what Mr. Kenyatta is indicted for. But this election has been seen by poll watchers as being credible. Is this part of the evolution, I guess, to democracy in Kenya?
I think a lot of people would say that this was really a marker for Kenya becoming, you know, a mature democracy. It's only Kenya's 4th president. They've only been independent since 1963, so it is a particularly young country. At the same time, there was violence on election day. And there was a killing of a number of police officers in Mombasa in a really horrendous and violent attack. But that story really got suppressed, pushed down almost intentionally by the local media. Even the foreign media didn't pick up on it very much, because going into the story, there was a lot of pressure for the media to report positively. So while it was on the surface very credible, you can't ignore a lot of the technical problems that took place in the election, a lot of the delays, and Mr. Kenyatta's main rival, Prime Minister Raila Odinga, is also challenging the results. So this election isn't really over yet. The impression overall is that it was positive, it was peaceful, you can't ignore that, but there were problems, and they're being looked at now.
VOA's Gabe Joslow spoke with On Assignment's Rebecca Ward. Speaking of Kenyan politics, there is an enormously popular political satire television show in Kenya, seen by some 8 million viewers per month. It's the XYZ show and features puppets to highlight political issues. Jill Craig has that story.
The XYZ show, now in its 7th season, satirizes Kenya's politicians and other personalities using puppets. No well-known figure is spared, and right now, political candidates are being lampooned in the lead-up to next week's election. Brian Kialo Msafiri is the show's director.
Politics in Kenya is second to food. People in Kenya love politics. We eat, live, sleep politics. And especially towards the election year, I mean, that's all people talk about. I'd say right now the whole country is very polarized, and people have taken sides, and all conversations, whether on social media, on the streets, in corners, in villages, is all revolving around politics.
One of the show's fans is Jackie Mwai. She's a public relations consultant from Nairobi.
So the humor brings in a way of softening up what you're really thinking about these politicians, especially with all the scandals they have. It's good to use humor to expose these people, without making it tense for Kenyans, especially during this political time.
But a show that pushes boundaries and presents the country's leaders in a less than positive light is bound to spark criticism. Nevertheless, XYZ's creator and co-producer, who goes by the name Gado, says the show's success means Kenya is moving in the right direction.
Sometimes, yes, we have been threatened and we've been sued and, threatened to be sued. I think the televisions we've worked with have received numerous complaints from politicians and threats also, can only show you that Kenya has as a democracy is growing.
Brian Kialo Msafiri believes that XYZ is also encouraging Kenyans to reflect on their responsibilities as citizens.
The beauty also about the show is that it gives Kenyans an opportunity to look at themselves, because we choose the leaders that lead this country. So when we poke fun at our leaders, in a sense we're also poking fun at ourselves, because we're poking fun at the choices we make.
The show is funded by grants from the Ford Foundation and Open Society Institute, among others. Jill Craig for VOA News, Nairobi.
Tunakuja mbio. Kwa debe utatupata. Jaseka amani. Amani. Sisi tuko area yote ya Kenya, 42 counties. 47 counties, samahani. 42.
And with that, we've come to the end of our show. Join us again next week when Alex Villarreal returns, and we'll have the story of Armenians in Syria who fled the fighting there and have not yet been able to go back to Syria. We'll also talk with our New Delhi correspondent about the fight for women's rights in India. Be sure to check out all of our episodes of On Assignment at voanews.com, Facebook, and YouTube. We'll catch you next week.